Yes. Stretched. The hideous yet ostensibly high performance resolution hack that virtually every counterer of strikes, spikes, and everything in between has at some point used and thought, yeah, this'll make me better.
It's on your right! Hello! Blue! Are you stupid?
What started as a way to save frames in an early unoptimized version of CSGO quickly became a pseudo-sports-science hack of sorts. An efficient, albeit inelegant way to make your FPS opponents bulkier, easier to see, and most importantly, easier to hit. Allegedly.
Somebody turn! Oh my god, how? Naf has found a kill elsewhere! What is happening here?
You see, for years, the question of aspect ratio and resolution has always been framed as a matter of preference. If you slam on stretched, run stretched. If you're a psychopath who finds the same success on native and is especially intimate with their monitor, run native.
Dude, I feel way more comfortable in 1920. I feel like it's because I've been using it for 80 years.
But as esports themselves became increasingly competitive and competition itself increasingly stiff, so too did people start to iron out the do's and don'ts of shitting on people. Over time, it sort of became the accepted wisdom, and still is in many ways, that all serious FPS enthusiasts ran lowered, widened reses since it just simplified things.
4x3.
I play 4x3 as well.
I play 4x3. 4x3 as well. 4x3? Yeah, 4x3, sure. 4x3. 4x3. I play 4x3. 16x9. 4x3.
But is that accepted wisdom warranted? Or rather, is it still warranted? Esports and the science thereof are ever evolving. Things have changed in the nearly 4 years since we last addressed this question. PCs have gotten more powerful, there's a whole new generation of players, and hell, there's even a whole new Counter-Strike.
If I had a good PC when I started playing the game, I 100% would play native, and I would recommend everybody play native. If you have the chance, if you have the chance, you're just starting, you're trying to figure out a res, 1,000,000% positive, you should just play 1920 by 1080 because it'll be better for you in the long run.
It's an age-old dilemma, almost as old as TAC FPS itself, but it's still being pondered every single day. To 4-3 or not to 4-3? That is the question. So let's answer it. All right, so here's the thing. It just so happens that the first cracked we ever made was about this very question. What is a stretched resolution, and does using one make you a better player? And it was great. And if you want a thorough, dare I say academic, albeit slightly outdated introduction to the concept of stretched, how to enable it, the upsides, downsides, and original science behind it, you should check it out. And while I don't want to repeat that video, I do think that the question of stretched deserves to be revisited. So let's revisit it. First, the basics. The term stretched refers to when a non-native resolution in a non-native aspect ratio is full screened to fit the parameters of a PC monitor, whereas modern video games are optimized to run at 1920 by 1080 on 16 by 9. Stretched is when you intentionally lower a res and widen it. Now, I know this is super basic, but you gotta remember, there are kids out there who were 12 playing Roblox the last time we made this video, and now they're 16 downloading the Faceit client and getting ready to send our boomer asses back to level 7, brother.
Welcome back.
The story as to where stretched comes from is fascinating. It's something we covered extensively in a separate video about Rops, who was for a long time the only top-tier professional CSGO player to consistently slam in native.
That's crumbling as well.
Rops is in a huge amount of trouble. He's gonna try and take matters into his own hands. Couldn't find the second shot fast enough, but Jax, he drops in. Oh, talk about an Estonian. Oh, talk about a superstar. Talk about the elite.
It's fun to be this guy that is only using 16 by 9 in the world in top level CS. It's fun, it's memes, gives you some pretty random exposure at times like this.
But much like CSGO itself, stretched came to prominence thanks to Swedish GOAT GetRight.
Back in 2012, I remember me and Frigo were sitting on a tournament called ESWC back then. The monitors back then was 75 hertz on the tournament. It wasn't used to stand at 120 or 2040 like it is nowadays. I remember I played with stretch time to time in 1.6. I talked to Friber a lot with it, and I think me and him changed directly to stretch on that tournament because it felt more smoother and it felt like You have more control when you're moving around and where you can spray around with it.
At first, the boy just wanted to get a couple more frames in what was then a brand new, barely optimized shooter on a series of old-ass tournament PCs. But then he realized that it sort of made Counter-Strike easier to play.
Or it felt like the models itself became more fatter in a way, or like more dragged out. So you feel like you can hit them more easier. And you can actually feel the sprays itself, it was like actually hitting more and more. And I think that's basically why I started using it. It felt more smoother in general when I walked around and like bunny jumping or shooting and spraying and all that kind of stuff.
And to be fair, a lot of people felt that way. A lot still do. Stretched pretty much became the standard tech of virtually every top-tier FPS player in the world. And not just in Counter-Strike. In Siege, Valorant, even Fortnite, it allowed you to lock the f in and just focus on clicking heads.
I am hitting more one taps. I feel like I'm hitting way more one taps with this config.
Which is great, but there are downsides. And we all know what they are.
Remain. Wah! That's the best 4x3 example I've seen in years.
On your right.
Saw him. That's 4-3.
Now, you'd think that in the modern age of competitive FPS, slashing away a third of your view model might be construed as archaic. Barbaric even, a silly, old world, objectively limiting way of focusing one's attention that surely fraggers would have outgrown by now. But no. On the contrary, actually, the next generation of pros love it.
First of all, I have full screen, 4:3, 1280, 960, and 360 gears.
Okay, 4x3, 1280, 960.
Yep.
Stretched.
Yep.
Why do you like stretched? Have you tried native? Black bars stretched or just like 16 by 9?
Yeah, I played 16 by 9 like for 5 days.
Yep.
And it was really good first 2 days, but then I was so bad.
Okay.
So I changed because it's not like mine. I was trying to play with black bars as well. You have less FOV than on stretched.
Sure.
So it's kind of annoying for me.
Okay, all right.
Back when we first addressed this issue in Cracked, the split between native and non-native users in professional CSGO wasn't a split at all. It was a sliver.
4x3 all day, 1024 black bars, bro, that's how we roll.
4x3, that makes it easier to one tap.
4x3. More tunnel vision.
Rops was pretty much the only truly top-tier competitor to consistently run 16.9, and anyone else who ran it did so sporadically. Leaving aside past outliers like Shroud or Brax, the landscape of Counter-Strike was dominated by non-native users.
What res did I play in the Boston Major? Challenger stage, or like the first stage, 1280, 960, and then after that 1024 for the rest.
What's funny is that while 4.3 is definitely still the wave in CS2, it's not nearly as skewed as it used to be. While the vast majority of CS2 pros continue to run some variation of stretched, with 1280 by 960 standing out as the so-called god res, the scene has definitely become a lot more open to the idea that you're not griefing if you run native. Now, there are likely a few reasons for this. The first is that PCs have gotten better. Running CS2 in 1920 by 1080 isn't that hardware intensive and doesn't put as much of a strain on existing systems as it did previous ones, nor does it put as much of a strain on your eyes. You see, the second reason could very well be that 1280 by 960 just doesn't look nearly as excellent in CS2 as it did in Go. In fact, if you're gonna run 4.3 in CS2, a lot of people are recommending 1440 by 1080, which despite being closer to native, feels more like old 1280, even though it doesn't stack up to how good 1280 used to feel in Go. Another reason could obviously just be the new CS2 engine. Smokes are obviously much more defined, so are player models, environments. The game is just easier to see things in, and you don't really need to stretch out the resolution to make out a target in the distance. Another reason, and hear me out on this one, could very well be Valorant. Valorant did expose or re-expose a lot of CSGO players to the benefits of 16.9, such that in some cases when they came back to CS2, the res came with them.
Have you guys played any different resolutions other than 1920?
What's the point?
That's what I'm wondering. like Valorant. Like, it's like Valorant.
Everyone's gonna play 1920.
What's really funny, though, is that over the past few years, Valorant has seen an upsurge in 4.3.
I definitely don't hit that shot on the Phoenix or the Deadlock if I'm playing native. I already know for a fact.
Unfortunately, because of the anti-stretched parameters that Riot have built into Valorant, getting a so-called true stretched res is much more difficult than in CS or any other shooter. TENS actually has an excellent tutorial if you need a step-by-step guide on how to do it. Which raises a question. The question. Is stretched still just better? If an entirely new generation of world-class FPS competitors are still using the same res that Get Right was f***ing people with back in 2012, does that carry some sort of significant, albeit speculative, scientific value? In other words, is the proof just in the pudding? Literally all members of HLTV's top 10 for 2024 play unstretched. All 10. It's only when you hit exertion at 14 that you get our first native user, and then of course ROPS at 18. Tons of top-level professionals who used to play stretched have started experimenting with native since the advent of CS2. Sometimes to mixed results.
Oh. 1920.
Is 4.3 still the choice of the best? Yes, but it's also seeing less use throughout the entire top level of play. So it's sort of hard to know what to do with that information. Which is around the time I bring in Colten.
And now, the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
All right, you've heard from the counter-striker, now it's time to hear from the scientist. If I'm being honest, this was actually kind of a tricky topic to come to any real definitive answers on. This is a bigger question than just, are your eyes better at tracking smaller, slower targets or larger, faster ones? As it turns out, academia has not done the research on stretched res performance in FPS titles, so let me help you come to a more nuanced answer that may help you better understand your performance in game. When you're playing a shooter, the thing everybody is focused on, quite literally, is the enemy and making sure you're hitting them. And for the average player, it's fine if that's as deep as it ever gets. But if you're the type of person who owns an aim trainer or is really trying to grind the ladder on Faceit, then you know that just hitting your target isn't the only thing that matters when it comes to success. Whatever game you're playing, you've got mini-maps, visual cues, UI elements, and tons of other things that can inform your gameplay, and they deserve some of your attention. Take this study of League of Legends players. Hear me out for a second, Counter-Strikers. When comparing high and low skill players in a controlled test, the authors from the University of Tokyo found that the higher skilled players had a wider range of gaze distribution, as well as a higher variance in gaze duration on different areas of the screen. To boil it down, they found that the better players were using more of the information available to them to make gameplay decisions, which is kind of obvious when you stop to think about it. There was actually a similar study in 2019 that focused on Counter-Strike. Global Offensive in this case. You're welcome for digging it up. The authors split the players into low skill, high skill, and professional groups, and found that as skill increased, the players' gaze durations varied more. Players were focusing quickly on one spot or another, then turning their attention back to something like watching an angle for longer periods of time than the lower skilled groups. So, clearly, if you're serious about getting better at games, this is a skill you should be developing. But where does stretched fit into this? This is the part where I get to do a little speculating, and you guys are going to have to be the test subjects on this one. In a study on athletes, basketball to be specific, researchers from the University of Central Florida, aided by the Orlando Magic, found that visual tracking speed, or VTS, is most likely related to the athlete's ability to see and respond to various stimuli on the basketball court, and suggest that enhanced tracking capability is a discerning measure for predicting or evaluating athletic performance. You can think of visual tracking speed as your brain's ability to quickly identify and follow multiple things via your eyeballs, which you definitely do a lot of in video games. The big takeaway, though, is that each of us does this task at a different speed. My hypothesis is that players with a higher VTS may actually benefit more from playing in a native resolution, where they can take in more information faster than their opponents. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. Especially for professional players, comfort and conditioning are very important. If you've been playing on a stretched res for your whole career, changing that is almost always going to cause your performance to dip. And for a lot of players, that's a deal breaker. But you are almost certainly not a professional player. You have a chance to shake up your game and take on the growing pains of changing some of the fundamentals of how you play. So, My suggestions? 1. Start working on some exercises to train your visual tracking speed. You don't need a fancy eye tracker to get better at this, and it will probably help your game more than you expect. And 2. Try a native resolution. If you're having trouble adjusting, figure out if your issue is aim related or if you're not able to focus your gaze when you need to. If you're struggling with your aim in a new resolution, that's something practice can solve. If you just can't seem to get your eyes to adjust to tracking targets in your new resolution and training your VTS isn't helping, maybe stretched is a better option for you. Should you play stretched is not as simple as a yes or no answer. This is something you're gonna have to experiment with. My hope is that I've given you some handles for your experimenting and that you'll actually go and try it. Then come back in the comments and tell me what's working for you and what's not. I'm genuinely curious in your experience with stretched, no matter the game.
And that was the guy who actually knows what he's talking about.
Look, the reality is obviously just that the science is still nascent and ongoing. It'll take time to see how much stretched really affects player performance. And I know that that's basically what I said last time, but the fact that we're still talking about it 4 years later means something. That's 4 more years that stretched has remained the choice of champions, even if the number of outliers has increased. Who knows what it'll look like in another 4 years? And look, ultimately, resolution is still a matter of preference. Just because something is better on average doesn't mean that it's better for you. The best resolution is still the one that works for you, even if there is a higher chance that that resolution might be a non-native one. So keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep an open mind. Esports are ever evolving, and so is the science behind it. You should be too.
Thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, hit the sub button and ring the notification bell. For unique bite-sized videos you won't find anywhere else, hit us up on our X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.